Welcome to folks just joining. We're going to get started in like 1 or 2 minutes. Feel free to chill and vibe with some good music while we wait. A couple of other folks just joined. So hi, welcome. We'll get started in like a minute or so. I've been told that people can actually not hear music, and I've just been talking as if there's music. So just so you all know, there was in fact music playing. But that was a nice idea. Let's just get started instead. So first off, welcome everyone. Welcome to Mass Work is DSA Work, presented by DSA Communist Caucus. My name is Tiff. I live in New York, and I'm also a member of DC 37, Local 1549, and I organize with Tenant Union Flatbush. I'll be the facilitator and moderator today, and I'm really, really excited to be here today with all of us before this incredible panel of organizers. Before we get started with our panelists, though, I do want to do our brief introduction to our event today. Which is that the 2023 DSA convention, as many of us are aware, is coming up in about 2 weeks, and convention season is well underway. Comrades across the country have shared their meditations on the past few years of our organization, while others continue to debate what should be prioritized looking forward. Our perspective in Commie Caucus is that DSA must become a mass organization that builds, sustains, and interconnects mass work organizers. By this term, we mean people who practice politics in the first person through external-facing work in the trenches of workplace fights, neighborhood organizing projects, and social movement groups. We believe that successfully responding to the challenges DSA faces means investing in institutions of class power on the terrain of everyday life. Today, we live in a state of generalized disorganization and depoliticization of the proletariat. The class institutions and political habits of organized struggle have generally been lost. This political problem underlies practically all other political issues that socialists face, and as such is not one we can be passive about. We must be deliberate in rebuilding the class institutions whereby socialists can reconstitute working class collectivity and subjectivity necessary for the socialist project to succeed. Today, we have before us a panel of real heavyweights, members of some of the largest working class institutions in the United States who have been instrumental in their growth and politicized character. These panelists have generated, organized within, and led organizations by and for the working class. It is our view that DSA must become an organization of organizers. We envision DSA as an organization that can self-consciously understand DSA members who are organizing in their neighborhoods against landlords, in their union against defunct leadership, or in their work sites against bosses as active core members of the organization. We in Commie Caucus hope this panel generates conversations leading to the 2023 convention beyond dominant internal-facing matters, questions about what type of political line our organization should adopt. I'm going to ask our panelists a series of questions relating to mass work, and we'll have some time at the end for an audience Q&A. So let's get started. First, as both an introduction to yourself and to mass work, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and go over what the last year of organizing has looked like for them, based on the folks on my screen. And the first person is Justin, who's coming from tenant and neighborhood councils in the Bay. So take it away, Justin.
Thanks so much, Tiff. And thanks to all the other panelists and everyone watching. I'm really stoked to have these conversations here and at convention. So yeah, my name's Justin. I'm part of East Bay DSA. My last year has been a kind of mixture of some labor work. I'm part of the faculty union, CFA in California, and also a lot of tenant work. So I mean, in short, that has looked like kind of gearing up, on the one hand, gearing up for our negotiations, which are about to happen for my labor union, which are actually just now happening in the last like week or so, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, kind of like doing a lot of sort of door knocking, a lot of like inter-union work and stuff like that in the tenant union. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
And next, we have Comrade Sean from the National Labor Commission and the Teamsters.
Hey, comrades, thank you all for being here. Yeah, my name is Sean. I'm out here in Chicago. I am a UPS package car driver and an elected shop steward with Teamsters Local 705. I am also on the National Labor Commission. I think the last year of organizing for me has kind of looked like the previous four, which is, I've been working at UPS since 2016. And ever since 2018, I've been helping to be a part of and build the rank and file movement in our union to get rid of this really shitty contract that was forced on us, get rid of bad leadership in our union, and try to change things in the Teamsters. So I've been also really active on the NLC side with building up our Strike Ready campaign for DSA, which I serve as a co-chair of. So I think that a lot of, I've been told often and correctly that I wear too many hats. But I think that all of it has been really rooted for me in my coworkers at UPS Jeff Street here in Chicago, the 90 drivers who I am a shop steward of, and the hundreds of part-time preloaders that I work with every day. That's been the basis of my politics and my work, and everything radiates out from building power on the shop floor every day. That's where what I'm the most excited about, and where I see a lot of our great potential coming out of in all of our political work. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Sean. Next, we have Rebecca from UAW.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm in UAW 2865 at UC Santa Cruz. I'm a teaching assistant there, and 2865 represents all academic student employees across all 10 UCs. So this last year has been pretty crazy for us. We had the largest strike in higher ed history, and had a lot of mobilizing work leading up to that in terms of building and maintaining a stewards network, the eyes and ears of each department at UC Santa Cruz, doing intercampus work, connecting with other organizers across the state, and I guess above all, advocating for a long haul strike strategy, which would keep us on strike until we won all of the demands we had, right? So I can talk more about some of those particular interventions, but yeah, a lot of my kind of day-to-day work over the last year has been trying to, create these materials for stewards to be able to share with their departments, continuing to learn from them about what's going on and what people need, right? Like what are the demands? How can we build a campaign around those demands? How can we make agitation propaganda materials around those demands? And then spread that beyond just our campus outward.
Thank you, Rebecca. And finally, we have Sarah from the Housing Justice Commission and from Greater Boston Tenant Union.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, hey, everyone, I'm Sarah, she, her pronouns. I am in River Valley DSA, which is in the western part of Massachusetts. So the last year for me has been personally just there's been a lot going on. I moved from Boston, hence the Greater Boston Tenants Union, a little under a year ago. So it's been, trying to kind of find my footing in a new area. So just personally, it's been a little bit of a different year for organizing on my end. But I will talk a little bit about my involvement in GBTU, even though Western Mass, no matter what Boston people might think, is maybe not quite the greater Boston area, might be a little bit outside of it. But I did help to found GBTU in 2020, and I was active until I moved last year. GBTU itself has seen a lot of really cool growth. It is now starting to develop locals, which is really cool to see. I'm very mad because they're having a screening of I'm a Virgo this Sunday and I can't go. But it just kind of shows there's a lot of really cool solidarity and work happening there. So if you are in the Boston area or know of anyone, they should definitely get involved. So my last year has been mostly focused on more national level work. I'm on the steering committee of the Housing Justice Commission, and a lot of what I've been doing along with my comrades on the commission and outside of it is really building up our work with ETOC, the Emergency Tenant Organizing Committee, which was very lovingly cribbed from EWOC on the NLC. And we've been building that up within the HJC. We started that program in May of 2022. We've done informational presentations to a little over 20 chapters, I think. We've trained somewhere in the neighborhood of probably 150, 200 tenant organizers over a series of about 6 weekend-long trainings. We have around 17 tenant unions in formation or in our mentorship program. And up until a couple months ago, we did all of that without a budget. So it's been a pretty busy year on my end.
Thank you all. The next question I kind of want to talk about is, for many people, we think of an active DSA member as someone who basically is on a lot of Zoom calls, participates in local or national committees, but we're here to maybe provide a different perspective on what organizing looked like, what we've been calling mass work organizing. So first off, what does that look like? And what does DSA membership look like when the majority of your political work is in unions, either labor or tenant? And how can we understand comrades engaged in this work as core members of the organization? You'll each have 3 minutes to respond. Feel free, whichever one of you wants to go first, feel free to take us away.
Yeah, I can kick us off. And I'll use my 3 minutes by just saying that there's a kind of gulf between what it should look like and what it does look like. I think what it effectively does look like is for some people, like an absentee or paper DSA member. It's a lot of work. If you're gonna be in the trenches, agitating your coworkers, if you're gonna be in the trenches, building out a new local for your tenant union, whatever it is, it's going to be time intensive, and it's going to basically be your total political world. And so that kind of produces a situation in which it's very hard to transition over and also attend committee meetings and also kind of know what's going on, because DSA has its own sort of ecosystem or whatever. And so it can look a little alienating, but that said, I think there's a lot of potential in bridging those two, and we could probably speak more about that later on. Okay, I'll kick it to someone else.
Yeah, I would co-sign everything that Justin just said. I think, I am definitely a person who doesn't mind doing committee work, is on way too many Zoom calls, right? Probably way too many for my own mental health, but that's not going to be the case for everyone. And it honestly can't be an expectation for being an active cadre member of DSA if we want to actually build what we say we want to build, which is a mass organization. And, I think what Justin said about the paper member aspect is really important here. I think there's a really big difference between somebody who pays dues to DSA the same way that they might pay, a monthly membership fee to the ACLU or something, and somebody who pays dues to DSA, but is really busy with their tenant or union organizing, and so maybe isn't as active. And I think that we need to start to think about membership and conceptualizing that maybe a little bit differently. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I think that there may be some conversations that we need to have as an organization around, what our expectations of membership are. I think the bigger question and thing that is really at the heart of this, though, is that people can't be expected to be in the weeds of every single DSA interpersonal and semi-political conflict to be an active, informed member. And as an organization, it's really important that we foreground political visions and political differences over those, interpersonal arguments and legacies of caucuses falling apart and all of these things that if you have spent like 3 minutes in the DSA discourse, you sort of understand or floating around in the background. That's not a healthy organization. It isn't good for any type of organizing, let alone, I think, the type of organization that we're interested in.
Yeah, I can build on that a little bit. So in terms of my DSA work, I am part of our local labor working group, which is sort of like EWOC, although it's not formally affiliated. But the idea there is that folks come to us if they need support in some type of way, whether that's, they're just trying to organize their workplace for the first time, or, most recently, I would say we had someone from UPS come and say, I just want you to help us mobilize for our practice picket, right? And so there's a huge variety of things that we do for folks in the community. And so that's pretty much the extent of my kind of formal DSA meetings I go to, right, on a regular basis. And I think that the reason for that is that, at least in Santa Cruz, our chapter has really taken an approach toward organizing as electoral politics. And I just don't have the bandwidth at this point, with all of my union work and sort of the labor work that I'm invested in doing, to be, doing that type of canvassing for an individual. And so there's been kind of some disagreement actually in our chapter about this. And I think it's brought up a lot of really important questions for us about what is worth us putting our energy and our time into. And is it putting all of our energy into an individual who's running for mayor that will likely lose? I just think it's a worthy question, right? And it's no digs on anyone. It's not that they're not great, right? It's just the reality that building an organization of workers or of tenants is spreading out a lot of that energy, right? If you can inspire people and get them to join you in what you're doing, and share sort of your ideology and inspire folks, I think that that's different than trying to mobilize a town of landlords to vote for a socialist, right? And that's the situation here in Santa Cruz.
I think that all the other comrades on this call have really hit on that there's I think a big divide between where DSA is and where it should be. I think with this question, I think for myself and a lot of other comrades who are active at UPS, so we do have this national UPS network. We have over 80 comrades who currently are all engaged in this project of, building a militant movement in our union, participating in what could be this huge historic strike fight, and then beyond that, carving a space for a left pole in our union and broader labor movement. But I think this question that we grapple with a lot is how do we make DSA a political home for our coworkers, and I think that it does come down to re-understanding what an active DSA membership means. I think a lot of our current understanding of active membership comes down to taking on essentially administrative roles in the DSA structure. And that's a skill, like that's a specific skill to take on and do administrative work. Not everybody in the world has those skills, right? I mean, I know I joke about it a lot, but it's true. Like, I mean, coming as, you know, out of UPS, like my biggest hurdle with being on the NLC was understanding what Airtable is and like how all those kinds of things work. That, you know, I've got like some other skills that I have, and a lot of my coworkers have a lot of other skills that I don't have. We have to create a space where ordinary working people can bring their skills and bring their felt needs and concerns, and see that this space is a place where they can take those ideas, take those skills and put them to work for this broader collective goal of social transformation, of transformation of our works, transformation of ourselves. I know here in Chicago, our Teamster network, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is how do we kind of make ourselves almost like a social space for coworkers? You know, the first event that we ever organized was a bar social, a fundraiser for UAWD, and we got some local auto workers to come out, and we had like a New Year's Eve party at like a union-owned bar in town with a bunch of our coworkers, a bunch of auto workers, and it was a great time. You know, we've talked about during the summer setting up like a soccer league or something like that. Figuring out ways to like engage our coworkers where they're at, but also like bring our politics into it. Because I think that that's also a key thing that we don't talk about enough in DSA, is that, you know, when we're talking about building socialism out of this current moment, I think a lot of that comes down to a lot of values and a lot of ethics and a lot of this like sense of a collective that's opposed to everything that capital is and that everything capital creates, right? And a lot of that can come down to, you know, promoting practices of cooperation, of solidarity, and of like struggle together for like a bigger good. So I think the more that we kind of delve into that and realize that a lot of those practices already exist in working class life and working class society, I think that we can really build what we need to build here.
Tiff, would it be okay if I added on one small piece to that?
Go for it.
Amazing. I just wanted to really highlight something that Sean said, because I think it gets at the heart of what we're talking about here, which is that oftentimes I think in DSA, for, you know, a lot of reasons, we conflate administrative skill with leadership. And I think that we need to start thinking about leadership more broadly and in different ways. And I say that as a person who, I think I'm actually pretty good at administrative work. I generally like it, but that doesn't mean that I should or can be a leader in every situation. There are lots of other skills that are necessary, and there are lots of other types of leadership that I think we need to think about fostering.
Fantastic answers, comrades. Now I want to ask a specific question about our labor work. So specifically, Sean and Rebecca, would love to hear your thoughts on this. Of course, anyone else can jump in if you'd like. So what is your assessment of DSA's labor work? How can the organization continue to invest in members' capacity to organize where they work and also support the labor movement broadly?
I can jump in here. You know, this is actually something that we really ran up against during our strike, particularly toward the tail end of it. So, you know, the strike was 48,000 workers, and then it was 36,000 workers after one of the locals stopped striking. And toward the end of it, there was this disagreement basically about sort of socialist labor strategy, I would say. A lot of, I guess you could kind of call them like leaders or even staff members of UAW 2865 felt that we had already reached what they were calling our peak power, right? And everything after this was downhill, right? And I think those of us at Santa Cruz and sort of aligned with what I see as a mass work strategy felt like no, we need to stay on, like, we're building our power as workers the longer we're out here, right? And we're not going to stop striking until we get what we're asking for, right? We're not going to capitulate. And so there was this real disagreement that I think, even though it was playing out within our union, what was really interesting was it was actually also playing out within DSA California, because a lot of these people at different campuses were members of DSA that we were really disagreeing with. And so actually it's the Santa Cruz Labor Working Group worked on a little pamphlet particularly about this that I think we do have as a Google Doc, and maybe I can distribute it around for the attendees. But sort of the thesis of it was, we don't want to devolve into this kind of labor liberalism, right? We want to maintain a working class approach to labor strategy, right? So I think that was a big lesson for me, was that across the state, DSA and national as well, DSA does not see labor consistently. And I think that it would really benefit DSA on a national and a statewide level to do a lot of this work, thinking about, like, what does DSA think about labor work, right? There's a ton out there about electoral work, but there's not a lot about labor organizing and how this can be sort of folded into DSA's project and overall mission.
Yeah, I think Rebecca hit it on the head, and I really do think that, like, the UC strike is really illustrative of, like, it's a good, I think, precursor to something we're probably going to see start playing out nationally inside DSA, right? Because obviously, like, DSA is reflective of the contradictions in broader society and in the broader working class movement that we are a part of, right? And like all contradictions, those start getting played out as class struggle moves, right? Right now there is a lot of DSA involvement in the UPS contract fight, either among comrades who work at UPS or among the over 100 DSA chapters that are part of the Strike Ready campaign. That's been a great campaign. It's been building, like, concrete organic connections between rank and file Teamsters and local DSA cadre all over the country. And it's helped us restart labor work where we didn't have it. It's helped other chapters really root their labor work in actual rank and file worker organizing. But, like, we are going to see, like, contradictions play out there, right? Because you have comrades that have a good, maybe they have a better relationship with a local's leadership than they do with a local rank and file activists. You have some comrades who are longtime rank and file workers in the union, and others who have different leadership roles in the union. We're going to see, as that contract fight moves forward, as that class struggle continues to move forward, we're going to see those contradictions keep playing out. And then going into right after that, you've got UAW, the big three fight, where we're going to see a lot of those contradictions that Rebecca raised up that happened in California play out across the rest of the union and the rest of our DSA comrades involved in that. I think it's a tough thing for us to work through because there's people are going to feel like tied to their positions, right? But we have to. I think that coming out the other end of it, we are going to be more well-positioned than ever before in terms of actually having a workers' movement in this country, a movement where us as DSA, as the broad left, and the labor movement are pretty well integrated into each other, and we start to move as this kind of singular whole. But as that happens, we are going to see these contradictions play out that happen from our big tent organization. And I think that if we put the worker, the collective worker at the forefront of our approach to labor work and our approach to how we change society, I think we'll come through the other side. But it's going to be a rough ride. But I'm ready for it, so it'll be good.
Thank you both. The next question is for Justin and Sarah. So Sarah, you mentioned ETOC earlier, the Emergency Tenant Organizing Committee, which was created, as you know, by the HJC, the Housing Justice Commission, in the last year, based lovingly, as you say, on the EWOC model, to support DSA tenant organizers and seed new tenant unions across the country. How can DSA continue to support ETOC and build out similar initiatives?
Sure, I can jump in. Well, one really easy way, if you're a delegate to the convention, here's my plug. We have the HJC consensus resolution. It's consensus resolution number 1. And that resolution does a few things, but just to briefly summarize, the main elements of it are it provides for some small stipends for our ETOC cohorts that graduate the program. It provides for some small travel subsidies for ETOC mentors, matching travel funds, so that mentors and mentees can actually work together face to face, because that's really, I think, important right now. And then there's a few others kind of smaller provisions around, getting access to some technical tools, getting a small amount of fundraising support, things along those lines. But if you are a delegate, please vote for the consensus resolution, because that is one way that you can materially ensure that ETOC continues and can further develop. We would love to be able to form, 50, 100 tenant unions across the country, but we're going to need a few more resources than we currently have to make that happen. I, will also say, if you are so inclined and have that orientation, we would love to have your help in ETOC and have your help joining the HJC as well. I can drop a link to join in just a moment. We can always use more hands on deck. So that's my HJC hat and my plug for that work. In a more general way, what I'd say is, one of the things that I think is really great about ETOC and EWOC and some other models that I'm seeing kind of emerge in DSA are really that foregrounding of mentorship. I think that's incredibly important. The left, it's a cliche, but the left has been on its back foot for so long that we've lost a lot of knowledge. And so we really need to learn from each other and take that seriously. So I love the foregrounding of mentorship. I love one of the things that we focus on, and that I know EWOC focuses on as well, is building up just basic organizing skills, learning how to have an organizing conversation, learning what inoculation is and how you can overcome, together with your fellow workers or tenants, fears around organizing. That's so important that we build those muscles. And DSA is a really, really, really great place to do it. It's not the only place that it's happening, but it is probably one of the main places that it's happening right now. And I think we need to really seize that moment, because that's incredibly important. That, if we want an organization of organizers, everybody has to learn how to organize.
Yeah, I kind of want to take a little bit of a step back from the really incredible EWOC and ETOC programs that I just think there's a reason everyone likes them. They work really well. They're great programs. But just to maybe take a step back and talk a little bit about the kind of analog question to what was asked of our comrades who are doing primarily labor stuff to the tenant world. And I think we see a very similar kind of thing. I think Sean really put it nicely when he said that there are these contradictions that we're all steeped in. They exist in the organization, and these take the form of debates and disputes within the organization itself. And housing is it is not exempt from this as well. And the tenant issue or the tenant struggle isn't obviously either. And so, I think what's really interesting though, when it comes to some of these debates, not all of them in DSA, but some. I'm thinking of the one that Rebecca mentioned a second ago with the UAW strike. I think Sean is right. We're going to see it again big time with Teamster strike. And it happens all the time, I think, at smaller levels, at the local chapter level, with regards to like tenant unionism versus, like, let's say, tenant advocacy efforts. Is that there are these debates, but they're not just like debate clubs. These are debates with stakes, because there are DSA members going out and doing the organizing. So it's not just like a theoretical practice that you get in some of these debates, whether it's on the tenant or the labor side, but actually people feel really passionately about them because you're speaking from not just like a position that you hold, but from organizing practice that you're kind of embedded within, along with other workers or along with other tenants. I mean, I saw this really unfold with the UAW strike in East Bay DSA. There's a huge debate about do we support the kind of left-wing flank who's calling for the long haul strike or not? And the contradiction was clear there, because we had a member of the East Bay DSA on bargaining, but that person was a minority of the rank and file members who are also dual-card DSA members. So you could see how that would be like a major conundrum, to say it nicely. But that also, like, a similar dynamic played out in regards to housing and tenant work in East Bay DSA many years ago. And there was a big debate about, well, should we build up this new tenant union, or should we focus on like advocating for, let's say, a lower number for how much rent can go up in the city of Oakland or something like this. And that was kind of at the origins of Tank. And I guess the thing that I want to like really emphasize here is that, like, when it comes to like doing this work of like mass work organizing, the strength of your argument isn't simply about like how well you can put it in a meeting or how correct you are. It's also like built on that organizing work that you've already conducted. And like we've seen the debate in East Bay DSA shift over time, because the tenant union has got legs. It went from less than 20 members to almost 1,000 dues paying members. Tons of DSA comrades are joining Tank and organizing in Tank. Many of us, myself included, are on like, it's not a steering committee, but something close to it, a coordinating committee for the union. So, once you're able to like show and demonstrate through the actual organizing, these debates not only become more meaningful, but they also, I think, tip in your favor. So I just kind of wanted to add that as well.
Thank you both. And then I guess I'll ask, so, some of what we've talked about already, Rebecca, you put this, I think, in a really funny way, which is this idea of like, do we try to convince the town of landlords to vote for a socialist mayor? Justin and Sean, y'all kind of mentioned this idea of rebuilding or the struggle at UPS having in it the potential to rebuild a real worker movement in the US, foregrounding a kind of collective worker subjectivity. And Sarah, I think you mentioned something really, really great about like DSA administrative skills being like the thing that's like, if you're in DSA, it means you're on Airtable a bunch, right? So I'm wondering for each of you, of course, are in DSA, but also have done this work in your unions. What potentials does mass work organizing, as we've been calling it, have that other types of organizing may lack?
I'll take a first stab at it. I think that mass work organizing has the potential to offer a political alternative in the labor movement. I think that the more that the more time I've spent inside the labor movement, and the more time that I've spent as a part of this contract fight, the more apparent it becomes that even the most well-intentioned trade unionists in the broader movement really do kind of accept neoliberalism as just a part of the world that is unchangeable. I know that in my current contract fight, people who are, good trade unionists, people that worked up through the ranks, who are militant stewards, people who, really hate the boss with everything they have. When they hear about, when we're getting proposals on automation or on gig work or something like that, those kinds of things, they're like, well, the industry's changing, the union's got to change with the industry. Or they say, hey, we really can't tell management how to run their business, right? They say these kinds of things because they were brought up in a union, in a labor movement that truly believed those things, right? And I had a good comrade in the UE who said that that's letting the boss live rent free in your head, and I think it's very true, and I think it's very prevalent in our unions. And I don't think that there really is any counter to that outside of us, right? And I think that the mass work organizing that we can do inside of the labor movement, inside of our unions from the shop floor, of being like, actually, no, we don't have to accept the development plan of capital as a natural phenomenon. This isn't the weather. This isn't that tree that's growing in my front yard. Like, automation is a decision, a conscious decision being made by human beings that have a class interest in seeing that happen. We don't have to accept that. In fact, we need to put forward our own ideas of how we develop this economy and our workplaces in our interests. And guess what? We can tell the company how to run their business. That's what a union contract is. We just need to expand upon it. We need to militantly enforce it, and we need to build this fight beyond it. So I think that really what this does is it offers something that's desperately needed right now. I mean, we all see that. I think it's indisputable that there is a new moment in the labor movement right now, and we really are on the crest of a situation. And I think not since the 30s has it been true that the left is a part of a revival of the labor movement. DSA is really at the center of a lot of this. We are integrated into a lot of this, whether it's inside the Teamsters, inside the UAW, in Hollywood, with Amazon, with Starbucks. We are there in the front lines, in the trenches, helping to make this happen. I think it's going to be absolutely critical that we offer this alternative, one that comes rooted from our day-to-day shop floor experiences and our shop floor struggles. We pull from that the political lessons that we can then apply more generally. But that's what we have. That's where we can go, and we really need it right now and going forward.
Yeah, I love all of that. We could probably just end there, but I'll say that for me, mass work offers some really amazing possibilities that actually connect to my personal favorite of our Commie Caucus principles. So if you haven't read the Communist Caucus statement, I dropped the link in the chat. We have what I think is a really nice, sort of series of principles. But my personal favorite is number 4, which is about not merely accessing power, but about building it. And I think that is what mass work can do. And there's a big difference between, simply trying to get a foothold in capitalist state power and actually trying to build our own power so that we can overturn that. And as we kind of talk about in that statement, the process of doing that work actually changes us. It changes our relationship to capitalism. It changes our viewpoint. And that's really only possible by being engaged in that work. I feel that really strongly. That's something that is really core to my own practice. I think that frankly, we need more of that in DSA. So yeah, I think for me, that is the biggest opportunity that this offers, because any type of reforms that we might get along the way, any type of, lessening the boot on our necks is only going to come when capital has to concede something. It doesn't come from trying to play nice and get a foothold in the halls of power. So that, I think, is what mass work can offer to us.
Yeah, just to briefly add one thing to that, because I think both what Sean and Sarah said are so spot on. But I would say also, I brought up this term labor liberalism a moment ago, and I think kind of the inverse of this is a class struggle unionism that does not frame a relationship between bosses and workers as a negotiation or as reciprocal or as collaborative. And I think that that's something that I've really seen in my union from folks on the more kind of like liberal to conservative side of things, is this idea like, well, we're going to ask for 54,000 a year, but we'll assume that we'll probably just end up taking 30. And it's like, that's not the strategy, right? The strategy is ask for 54 and stay out on strike until you get 54. And I think that that's something that more folks need to understand. And I think it comes from this feeling that workers just don't have power, right? So I totally agree, building that power and showing workers, that you can get what you're demanding, like you have that power, right? So that's kind of redundant based on everything everyone else has said, but just remembering that there is not a negotiation happening there, right? Like this is a demand from workers to the boss.
Yeah, tough to add much to what all the other smart comrades have already mentioned, but I guess like for me, I can add like 3 more things maybe, and I'll just rattle them off really quickly. One of them is that I think transforming DSA into an organization of mass work organizers can repoliticize the left. And what I mean by that is like, all of a sudden you're going to have debates that matter. These aren't just like debates coddled from history about like, I don't know. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy this kind of stuff. Soviet Union, state capitalism or degenerated worker state, or whatever the old sort of debate that a lot of comrades sadly continue to have, I think can be set aside and we can begin to have real meaningful debate that has stakes. And once we become an organization of organizers, we can begin to actually identify what those real political lines are. And I think that's actually a really positive thing for socialist organizations. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think transforming the org in that direction could put DSA on a sort of foundation of its own making. Like I'm sure some people disagree with me, but our organization kind of came together through the winds of history, sort of arbitrarily, as evidenced by how different the politics are in the organization today as when it started by Michael Harrington and whomever else. And so I think it's really important that we don't rely on luck and fortune to build the socialist movement. We have to put down some foundations in solid ground. And in order to do that, there's only one solid ground for socialists, it's the working class. So if we have people embedded in the working class as part of the working class, that's how you're going to build the DSA that's going to be able to go the distance and take care of business. So that's the second thing. The last thing that I'll just mention, I guess to plug a Commie Caucus thing, since Sarah opened the floodgates for that one, is like, I think me and other people on this call and many others in our crew do think that one of the primary problems that we're facing right now is the disorganization of the working class. The despair that a majority of workers and unemployed people have, and also the belief in like neoliberal ideas and inevitability that Sean brought up, among many other problems, I think arise from the disempowerment that comes from being totally disorganized, being isolated, and having to basically look out for your own back. And to me, that's the primary problem we need to get at. It's the main thing that socialists need to figure out in a multiplicity of terrains. And so it makes sense to me, based off of that, for us to found or refound DSA on those premises.
Fantastic points, everyone. I promise I will let I will turn it over to the audience Q&A in a second. But I do want to ask one more question because everything else said was so spot on, which is, Justin, you brought up this idea of mass work repoliticizes the working class. And I feel like what I've heard in a lot of your stories and a lot of your reflections is this idea of a sort of transformation in subjectivity through the experience of struggle, right? And that is in fact how people understand themselves as workers or understand themselves as being part of a movement. It's not through, having specific lines or certain historical ideas. So I'm wondering if you could all talk a little bit about that, the experience of like this actual concrete struggle in our buildings where we live, where we work, how that can be transformative for comrades and for the people that we engage.
Maybe I'll start this one if that's okay. And I'll just I'll answer this by just giving like an example that I think anyone who has done tenant work will identify as some classic common feature. Like when you go out and you organize a building or a set of buildings into your union, you're going to encounter tons of working class people that don't have, I'll just call it perfect ideas. Like they're dealing with things in society that they're not very happy about. In terms of housing, sometimes it's package theft, sometimes it's homelessness, sometimes it's people making noise or whatever. And under these conditions of kind of like neoliberalism, the only avenue for a lot of working class people often is calling the police. And so like by bringing people into a tenant organization, by showing that we can resolve issues collectively, and by identifying the true source of the kind of social problems that we're all sort of steeped within. In the case of the tenant situation, 99% of the time has everything to do with real estate capital and landlord power. And once you bring people into that motion together, I've seen it again and again, people will start to develop new ideas. And that's because people aren't naive. Like ideas have to have some practical application and there's some practical aspect that I think is really important. And we can't just proselytize, we have to have real solutions, real organizational solutions that we bring to the table that really identify the problems and put forward a long-term strategy for addressing them. So, I mean, that's what I would say in terms of the tenant stuff.
Yeah, if I were a doctrinaire Maoist, I might ask, where do ideas come from, right? But yeah, I believe through practice. And personally, the example that Justin gave, I have seen happen. I have seen that exact situation happen where people started to rethink their relationships, with the police because they had other, tenant unionists saying around them, hey, actually, maybe that's not the best way to deal with this. So I have seen that happen myself. It can start to transform people's political consciousness. I think also, I have had the experience of while doing tenant organizing, working with other tenants who they've never been in a labor union, right? Labor density is still really, really low. Although we're fighting the good fight and, hoping to turn that around. They don't necessarily have firsthand experience with what that type of organizing looks like. They may not have any impression at all about what a union is. It may take some, convincing to even join together in something called a union because that may be totally foreign to their experience. And being able to be part of something where there is an enemy, where there is a clear enemy that you can identify, and that you can start to understand actually how it's not just your landlord. It is, your landlord and real estate capital, and also the mayor, and also, your city council, and also your boss. And you can start to make these connections, maybe just because your landlord won't fix your sink. It can be an incredibly transformative thing for people to, maybe for the first time in their lives, engage in that kind of collective action and identify, oh, actually, there's a class thing here that I've never thought about before. I may have never thought of myself as part of the working class. I may not have, identified with that term. But all of a sudden, it's really obvious when, the police and my landlord are working together to evict me. So that's the type of transformative power that I think mass work and that this kind of orientation can have.
I don't have much to add. I think Justin and Sarah really got that one.
Yeah, I think our comrades really hit the nail on the head. I mean, I could give, I guess, like anecdotally a little bit of what mass work organizing has done in my area. So where I work, there wasn't in my particular center in my building, there wasn't a lot of union activity for a long time. And then when I started getting involved there and, eventually became an elected steward, I really kind of put as much as I could into building up like a practice of daily union activity on the job. And really making it not me as the steward being the union, but all of us collectively acting as a union. And I've been at it for about 4 years now where I'm at. And I've been just like the level of difference from in change in my coworkers and how they view themselves, not just what their understanding what the union is, but in terms of their understanding to like really like dictate their lives has been really incredible. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed the most out of it has just been seeing this sense of like really like this absolute predominance of this collective sense, like my coworkers act together. If they see a coworker lagging behind, they talk to that coworker and we keep each other together. Like I've been getting pulled into a lot of other shit, obviously with this contract fight, with involvement in DSA and with everything else. And I had some coworkers in my center who were very antsy about a strike, and they weren't that into it. They're good people, they're good workers, and they're good friends, but they were very antsy of the strike. Without me, directing people and pushing people into some stuff. I had a couple of coworkers, people who weren't that involved in the union before, but because we have a daily union activity on the job, we file group grievances. We're very active collectively. We meet as a union on the shop floor every single week. I had a couple of coworkers just take it on themselves to go and have one-on-ones with those people. Like they approached it like, an organizer that went through a bunch of labor notes trainings about like, okay, like here are the 4s and we need to get them to be 2s. And I didn't know that they were doing that. I was like, oh shit, I wish I had more time to devote to like winning these coworkers over. I find out because, when we do a practice picket at my building, some of these coworkers who I had seen were 4s were holding the banner and leading the march, because I had other coworkers who had really been like, no, we're all moving together. We're not going to leave anybody behind in this. That's been very transformative to see for myself. And I think that for me, it really like hits the nail on the head. Michael Lebowitz, who was a great writer, passed away recently. He talked about why the working class is the revolutionary force in society. He talked about there's obviously, the doctrinaire reasons, right? means of production, et cetera, et cetera. But he also really said that the true essence is that the working class has the capacity to transform themselves and struggle. And that is why they are the revolutionary force, because ordinary working people have the capacity through class struggle to realize their full humanity and their full potential. And I love seeing that. So I think this work is going to keep paying off into the future.
I'm happy to keep asking our panel questions, and I will keep doing so if people don't have any, but I imagine there are. So if you'd like to raise your hand on Zoom, I can allow you to unmute and ask our panelists a question. So I will give a little bit for people to raise their hands. All right, so we have one question from Amy. So Amy, go ahead, please.
Hi, everybody. Really interesting discussion. You've talked about you think you would like to see DSA become a mass organization. How do you define it now? How do you see it now? And how would you get there?
I can take a stab at this if unless other comments want to, but I mean, I think we're all in agreement that it is a mass organization, right? Where anybody can join DSA and get involved in whatever capacity they have available. What we want to see happen is for DSA to shift from just being a space where anybody can come into, but then taking the people that come in and transforming them into organizers who then go outward facing and organize the broader layer outside of DSA. I think that's more of what we've been kind of like harping on when we're talking about the mass work. It's less about transforming DSA into a mass org. I think we all agree that it is, but that there's more work that needs to be done in terms of making this an organization of organizers.
Would anyone else on the panel like to address that, or should we move to the next question? Okay. Our next question is from Aaron. So Aaron, please go ahead.
Just getting done with some laundry here, so taking a bit to form this question. Mass organizing is wonderful. Rank and file, like building up unions to be fighting powerhouses is great. But I think for a long time, like Chicago's teachers union was maybe pointed to like an example of like a militant union that really turned itself around. And their crowning achievement recently was electing Brandon, which is not exactly the socialist politics that we're looking for. How do we ensure the socialist ideology through our mass work? What do you think are the steps missing that it doesn't seem like it's a given just through class struggle?
I can take a stab at this one. Thanks, Aaron, for the question. I think the thing that I always remind people about when we're talking tenant organizing is that anytime there is class struggle, there are organizers. Whether those people see themselves as organizers or not, doesn't matter, they're present. And moving things in a direction will always require some intentional effort. And I think this is where bringing mass work into DSA and really clarifying within our organization what kind of tactical and strategic maneuvers people want to take in their sort of workplaces or neighborhoods is a way to clarify, like, what are we trying to do here? Where are we going with this organizing effort? Because actually, I think that there's a lot of stones that are unturned in many cases, even in advanced formations, let's say like Chicago Teachers Union. Because those organizations also, just like DSA and anywhere else, have a left and right spread. They have debates. They have every organization has its problems, its pitfalls, and its successes. And, like if we can get DSA to become the kind of real home of the working class militants, then we're going to be able to clarify through discussions and through practical experimentation and organizing what those next steps are, what it means not only to like say that you're a socialist, but to be a socialist on the shop floor, in the neighborhood or whatever. So, this is like a general question, but I think it's one that like is only really addressed through like doing the work together and really being able to like build that sort of culture of organizational debate predicated on real work and sort of collaboration, if that makes sense.
I would also add that I think really prioritizing, thinking like very, strategically about how can we mobilize our power to hurt the boss. Like, for example, at UC, being on strike for 2 days does nothing, right? Being on strike even for 2 weeks kind of does nothing. The UC learned during COVID that they could just move classes online and that they could just kind of wait, right, until we'd had our little fit, right? They were treating us like a child having a temper tantrum. When the city workers in Santa Cruz went on strike, SEIU, and they were only on strike a few days, unfortunately. But I think, when trash starts building up around town, people start noticing that in a different way. When their water treatment is not in operation, people start noticing that, right? A lot quicker. So the choke points are different. And, Sean, I'd be curious to hear what you think about this as a logistics worker, but identifying, right, like where are the choke points, and mobilizing around those in a mass way, right? That's like how to strategically, I think, organize in terms of like a class struggle unionism or a mass of workers, because you're not just kind of following this kind of like program or something. Like it's not the same every time, right? You're responding to what's going on, and you have to be flexible, and encourage workers, like Justin was saying, to have faith in themselves as workers, like to be an organizer, right? Like you don't need to have formal training to do that. You don't need to have read all this Marxist stuff to be a good organizer. So I think just trying to convince workers that, they can strategically think about where those choke points are, because they do the work, right? They know better than anyone else.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add on to that, because I think you're 100% correct, Comrade. And I think that, the fact that logistics is the heart of our capitalist economy and our capitalist system right now, and is becoming more and more evident every single day. And partially it's becoming more evident because the workers that make logistics work are really rising up right now, whether that's Amazon, UPS, a ton of other industries. I think that it's really is kind of the spot where we can have the biggest punch, and where not just with that, but where a working class politics will come out of. It's easy for me to say that here in Chicago. Chicago is where, every single railroad in this country intersects here. We have multiple major, freeways, and just this is the heart of the logistics system. But it's a true statement, no matter where we are in this country.
Or Justin, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just to add one other thing that came to mind, like I have had people in other contexts ask me like, well, why, this is from a totally different point of view, but why like be part of a socialist organization at all if you're going to do this mass work, which is another way of asking the question that I think the comrade asked earlier, but from a totally different political point of view, obviously. And I think there's an answer to that question that is relevant to the question posed, which is that part of the Socialist Project isn't only, it is about, let's say, getting Sean a really fat raise and getting Rebecca that COLA that she needs, and getting the tenants everything that their heart desires, in my opinion. But it's also about producing a working class movement across all these sectors. And if we're not intentional about bringing in organizers who are embedded in all these fights together into a single sort of organization and having actual building that ability basically for people to start to experiment with class-wide organization again, then we're never really going to see the possibility of socialism in our lifetime. So I think that's another reason for really making sure that we're trying to bring this mass work into the organization.
I want to ask one. I see there are a couple folks who want to ask questions, but I do want to ask one follow-up, not to be too self-indulgent, but there's been this, related to the question that was just asked, there's been this, I think, criticism sometimes that focusing on outward labor and tenant work is economistic, or that it's not political enough. And I think like that can be, I can imagine what we all think of that criticism, but to give it its proper due, is struggling for wages or rent, or for better wages, or against rent increases with landlords, is that simply economistic, or is there a real contestation of political power happening?
Yeah, I think this kind of gets at the question that Nico is posing in the Q&A as well, about how do you start to introduce socialist principles into this type of organizing, because look, you can have this type of organizing that is just focused on getting people a raise, that is just focused on, getting people's sinks repaired or whatever. That's totally possible. But we wouldn't be doing this work in a socialist organization if we didn't think that that socialism and communism have something to do with it, right? So, from my perspective, there are a couple different things at play. To give a very sort of like concrete answer to, I think, what Nico is getting at. Yeah, when I'm like knocking on someone's door, I don't say, "Hey, what's up? I'm Sarah. I'm a communist. Let's talk tenant unions." Like that's not an effective type of introduction, but it's also not something that I hide in my organizing, and it's something that needs to be built through really intentional political education. And that, we haven't talked a lot about political education so far on this panel, because I think rightly, we've been focused on the mass work question. But I think that that's a really important part of how we get beyond just these, critiques of economism, because it is totally possible to just fall into, just a struggle around the wage, and so I think that there's a real importance of, not just saying, we gotta fight for a raise because we need to build up a strong middle class, right? Like that's a really unfortunately like common refrain that I hear sometimes, but to always bring it back to class struggle, always bring it back to this is about more than just our immediate working conditions, our immediate living conditions, but those are important, and those are actually political too. And there are all sorts of like political education programs that we could talk about, and how to bring that into this organizing. But that I think is a fairly key part of our approach as well.
Yeah, I'll also say that I think certain demands can push us further toward a socialist or communist agenda. And I'm thinking in particular of the COLA demand, which Justin mentioned, the cost of living adjustment demand. And that's what folks have been fighting for at Santa Cruz since, gosh, like 2018, 2019. There was a wildcat strike around this in 2019 to 2020. And then it became a statewide demand of ours in this last contract struggle and this last strike. And what COLA would do is it would index our wages to the cost of living. So essentially, right, it would connect our housing with our working conditions. And I think that this is something that is really salient for what we do because of, Communist Caucus's focus on tenant organizing and labor organizing, right? So this, we see the COLA demand as being something that would actually also push a socialist strategy in the workplace. So it wouldn't just be that, the tactics of getting there would be hopefully, something that would, I think what I'm trying to say is like the strategy itself of making that a demand is a socialist demand. It's intentional to have that there because that would further the socialist strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that I really agree with what Sarah and Rebecca said. And just add a little more like maybe meat on the bone when it comes to the tenant stuff. Like oftentimes when we're organizing a new building or a set of buildings, like a tenant council or a portfolio, whichever you want to call it, part of what we're doing isn't just organizing around the cost of rent and making a claim through the language of economy that it should be set at a certain rate. What we're really doing in a sense is building class solidarity between people that hitherto maybe have never encountered each other, let alone trusted one another in any way, shape, or form. And an important part of that is the struggle for dignity and the demand for respect that I think a lot of tenants often feel slighted, they feel disrespected, and they should, based off of current conditions, in my opinion. So, it's impossible to win, I would say, any of those big picture demands, even strictly economic ones like rent reductions, without having to go through and struggle through problems of like, old tenants and new tenants, black and white, people that just are not in the same social or cultural worlds, even though they both are part of the working class, and figuring out ways to like bring them together, to trust each other and to hold solidarity with between one another. So, I just wouldn't call that economistic. That's like, I think part of building or a prerequisite for building a sort of like communist or socialist consciousness, really. I know we lost Tiff. Tiff,
Hello, can people hear me?
Yeah, we got you. We hear you.
My internet died for a second there, so apologies for just dropping off. But I believe Kishaf is also has a question. So please go ahead.
Hey, yeah. So, like everyone else has said, thank you so much to the panelists. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. My question was, well, okay, so first of all, I think that the fact that this caucus exists that's primarily focused on labor and tenant organizing and, sort of like building out the political power of the working class is amazing. At the same time, given that we exist within the umbrella of DSA, I was wondering if any of the panelists did have thoughts about the kind of questions around electoral politics that seem to be kind of gripping the wider organization, namely this tension between, purity testing and, I guess, disciplining is kind of the words that the two sides would use. I was wondering if we had any thoughts on that at all.
I mean, maybe I can kick us off on this. I think you're talking about this question of electoral accountability and the debate about, on the one hand, should elected officials affiliated with DSA be held to some account in regards to the positions that are held by DSA members officially or unofficially, or on the other hand, should we have a more flexible approach to electoral politics? I mean, I have my personal opinion here, which is I probably skewer towards the direction of having some discipline or some guardrails on elected officials. But honestly, like from the point of view of, I think the caucus, we've tried to really focus on what we think is a neglected site of inquiry, which is like these nitty-gritty questions of labor organizing and tenant organizing and labor strategy that don't have the kind of pyrotechnics of like AOC doing something that everyone gets mad at and then tweeting about it. You know, what happens in the shop floor in Milwaukee, I think is more interesting and has huge implications that I think we neglect when we get stuck in these other kind of like debates, at least to the degree that they happen. So it's kind of not a total answer, but you know, hopefully that kind of gets a little bit at your question.
We have about 5 minutes left. Would anyone like to ask a very quick question? I saw someone raise their hand and then immediately put their hand down. So I encourage you to, okay. Next is Gray. So Gray, please go ahead. Gray, you were muted if you're trying to talk.
Understood. Thank you. But yeah, thanks again, everyone. It's been an awesome and valuable conversation. Sorry, I can't talk super great right now. I asked my question in the chat, but it's not a quick question, but essentially, you know, obviously the project of reorganizing the working class and repoliticizing class struggle is a really long-term project. And we're in this moment of ecological collapse that has its kind of own timeline and scope. And so I'm just curious how, in your experience, that has affected mass work or inflected the way you strategize rhetorically or politically in your labor or tenant organizing. Thank you.
So I have a kind of a, not a quick answer to this, but just like a quick thought, which is, you know, I think that this kind of intentional mass work and building an organization of organizers is, under current conditions, a kind of long-term project. I think it could happen in a relatively quicker time than we might realize just because of other things going on. But I think under the sort of conditions that we've been used to for the left for the past 20 years, it's a long-term project. But as conditions change, the pace of struggle, the pace of organization building, the pace of movement changes with it. I think that a lot of times we all get very envious of, you know, the left that existed during and after World War I and during the Great Depression and during World War II and immediately after World War II, and all these sort of moments when history seemed to be moving really fast and millions of people, ordinary people, were just engaged in societal changing events. You know, during all of that and in the moments prior to that were groups of communists and socialists who were like, we have to dig deep and we have to have our level of organization rooted in ordinary working people in their lives. So I think that, yes, this is a long-term project under current conditions, but the ecological conditions are very, very rapidly changing. And I think that we're going to see the nature of class struggle change accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think for me, it makes the importance of this work, it just makes it even more dire, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen as we're, heading deeper into the climate crisis. We basically know it's not going to be good. We have some ideas about what might happen, but we can't really, I think, fathom the full scope of it yet. But what I do know is that we have to build solidarity, and we have to build working class institutions. And maybe that sounds like a cop-out answer, but I don't think there's any other way through. So, it's scary, and it can be overwhelming, and it can definitely lead to a lot of despair. There's another question in the chat that I know we don't really have time to get to, but it's about hopelessness. And, I think lots of us probably can fall into that kind of climate doomerism. It's very, very easy to do because it's so terrifying. But the only thing for me personally that keeps my hopelessness at bay is organizing. And maybe that's a strange coping mechanism, but it's the only way that I know to keep myself from totally falling into a, complete doom spiral. So I don't know if that's what a therapist would tell you, but that's my take on it anyway.
Just to try to add something really quickly, and don't replace therapy with organizing. It's not going to work out well for you. But setting that aside, I don't know, maybe this is, it's a faux pas, I think, for Marxists to make any predictions, because we have a bad track record. But I feel really strongly that there is going to be a giant mobilization of the working class in the next 10 years. I think that the historical moment calls for it. And if we're not ready with some organizational bases set up to bring as many people on board into a socialist direction as possible, someone else is going to do it. Could be the right, it could be the liberals, could be anyone. So if we don't set up these organizations and these institutions in advance, we're going to miss out on that historic opportunity that I think is inevitable. But doing that feels really slow and difficult in times like this, just as Comrade Sean mentioned a second ago. And just as an anecdote, when we started the tenant union in the Bay Area, TANK, it was a tiny union. We could never have predicted that the COVID-19 pandemic would unfold and there'd be a housing crisis in the Bay Area because of it. But that's precisely what happened. And because we had an organization with a membership and some basic structure, we were able to grow from an organization of less than 20 people into a dues-paying or an organization with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dues-paying members. Now, that's nothing in comparison to what we need to do at a nationwide, let alone worldwide basis. But I think it illustrates how you can scale up in moments of crisis exactly through doing this kind of organizing.
I think that is a really good note, all of you, to end that on. This has, I think, been a really valuable conversation. So thank you all for sharing your insights with us. To sort of just close out before we end, we in Commie Caucus, to speak collectively for a second, hope that this panel has showed that DSA is already engaged in mass work on many different movement terrains. And rather than seeing this political work as something that is separate from the organization, but instead to see mass work organizing as key to addressing the issue of proletarian disorganization, which is critical for our organization and the movement as a whole. Sometimes I think we can conceptualize politics as something that happens exclusively inside the bourgeois state apparatus, or something that only emerges when organizations adopt the correct and sufficiently revolutionary political line. But which you all have talked about today points us towards what we in Commie Caucus have been calling a new practice of politics, based in building power on the terrain of every day through autonomous worker organizations, and thereby engendering new forms of working class collectivity and subjectivity, and allowing for new strategic innovations to emerge in the movement. And at the convention in less than 2 weeks, we hope to continue providing this perspective and intervening to scale up and support mass work initiatives. So thank you again to all the panelists and everyone who came through, and hope to see many of you in Chicago. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for coming out.
Guys, thanks.